Welcome to the Rock's Back Pages podcast. We're back on Zoom this week, so I'm on a screen with my colleagues Mark Pringle.
Hi, Barney.
And Jasper Mearson Bowie.
Hello, Barney.
And joining us all the way for this episode from Nashville is the highly respected critic and author Ann Powers. Hi, Ann.
Hello. It's such a thrill to finally be on this podcast. So we've worked a little bit to get here, but I'm so glad I'm here.
Oh, bless you. Well, thank you for getting up earlier than you might for this, Ann. We do appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm a vampire. What can I say? A lifetime of going to shows. You know how it is. Sorry for my smoky voice.
Oh, no. The smokier, the better. Anyway, this very week, listeners, Anne is publishing an amazing book about a very remarkable artist. It's called Traveling, and it's subtitled On the Path of Joni Mitchell. And unsurprisingly, for anyone who's read Anne in the pages of the New York Times or the Village Voice or the LA Times, or heard her on NPR, or read any of her books, it contains some of the most insightful writing on Joni that you're ever likely to read. We'll get to Joni in a little bit, and we'll even hear her voice, but we want to go back to the start of your life in music. Will you tell us how you came to write for The Rocket while you were still in high school in your native Seattle?
Yeah, well, The Rocket is a historically important music monthly that was founded in Seattle when I was a kid. And when I was a high schooler, I started writing for my Catholic high school newspaper. And I loved punk rock and, new wave music. And I wanted some way that I could be part of the scene, and I also loved writing. So I started, interviewing bands and stuff. And probably I was 16, around there. And one of the managers of one of our local new wave bands, the Cowboys, was friends with this woman named Carrie Jacobs, and she worked at The Rocket. And he suggested to her that she contact me. Wouldn't it be cool to have a teenager writing for the paper? How novel that would be. Kind of their own Cameron Crowe, I guess. That's probably where they got the idea. Although I didn't go on to have a multi-million-dollar film career, but
yeah.
Never say never.
Never say never. And he, of course, has those Pacific Northwest connections since he was married to Nancy Wilson for a while. Anyway, so I started doing that when I was just in high school, still in high school, profiling local bands, and quickly got assignments like interviewing Jane Wiedlin from the Go-Go's and Joan Jett. And, they put me on the women beat pretty fast. And they also put me on the kind of all ages beat. I did pieces on all ages clubs, which was a bone of contention in Seattle. There was a lot of regulations that made it hard to have all ages clubs. I don't know. I did a piece on like skateboarders. They really had me on that women and youth. I guess you could say I was doing the lifestyle pages, the way that historically women in the early days of pop music writing were always relegated to the lifestyle pages.
Yes.
But I learned a lot working for The Rocket because, well, for one thing, I was completely intimidated, but it was a hotbed of bohemianism and like great writers, and illustrators. So lots of amazing people went through that paper. And probably the most notable are the illustrators because Linda Berry started there and Matt Groening, who went on to found The Simpsons, and just so many great comics artists started there. So it was a really cool place to work, even if I was too nervous to talk to anybody there, basically.
You sent us a lovely piece. You mentioned the all ages clubs, and you sent us a lovely piece from December 1983 that you wrote for The Rocket. I'm just going to read a couple of short paragraphs just to give listeners a kind of flavor of this, your teenage reporting. It never made any sense to us. There we sat on every Friday night in Dad's gassed up Suburban, hair teased out to there, and energy level tipping the scales. The movie was over, and the question inevitably came up: what are we going to do now? The doghouse had lost its appeal after 7 months of onion rings. Cruising the beaches was simply stupid. And besides, it always rained, and we wanted rock and roll. So we'd drive around downtown Seattle, watching the privileged pass through the doors of Hibbles and the Golden Crown. It wasn't that we were starved for a drink. Scoring the stray Rhinelander, which I guess is a beer, never presented a problem. We just wanted a place to be. We just wanted to feel that being a kid was no crime.
See, I was like an angry young man novelist but I was just a 19-year-old girl.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so. In that piece, you then kind of talk about these all ages clubs that are opening up in Seattle. Jumping forward, and you graduated from Berkeley in, I think, 1986 or 1985?
No. I went to San Francisco State. So I left Seattle at 19, moved to San Francisco because I thought Seattle was too pastoral, basically, and everybody was writing about trees. So I went down to where the home of the beat poets, on the West Coast. And studied poetry and creative writing at San Francisco State. Got my undergrad there. But I then went to Berkeley for my master's degree.
Your master's, okay.
Yeah.
So what was floating your boat in that era in San Francisco? And who influenced your early music journalism?
Well, first I've got to jump back to Seattle for a moment because I got to tell you guys that I was such an Anglophile. When I was a teenage journalist and I would go to our local Tower Records, or if I could get up my courage, go to the more indie record store where they sold NME, Melody Maker, Sounds, and The Face, which was a new publication then. And I would just buy all of them. I was so into English music journalism. That was so important to me. And I read The Boy Looked at Johnny. I mean, we don't have to talk about the trajectory of Julie Burchill, but oh my gosh, that kind of writing was so important to me. You can imagine when years later I met John Savage in person, I was like meeting the Pope or something. It was just so exciting.
He'd love that.
I would love it, I'm sure.
Pope John Savage is good.
But so then when I went to San Francisco, at some point I discovered Mystery Train, Greil Marcus's book. And that was just a massive influence on me. As an aspiring, pretentious poet, I didn't think music journalism was really that legit, even though I thought it was really exciting and I loved the wordplay and the attitude of the English journalists I was reading. I didn't, my kind of pretentious literary aspirations were frustrated in the form. So it was really Mystery Train that knocked me over and gave me an idea I could do something different and bigger. And then I met Greil shortly thereafter. I was so shy and nervous that it's not like we became close friends at that point. But I do want to say he was incredibly generous at that time, mentoring younger writers, not just me, but Gina Arnold and later Sarah Vowell. And he's just always been a great mentor. So yeah, those were my early influences, along with, I don't know, William Butler Yeats. I was William Blake. No, but I was also reading postmodern theory. I don't know if I was understanding it, but it was the 80s and language poetry was huge and people were reading Baudrillard and Derrida and the like. So I was trying to incorporate those ideas as well.
Yeah.
Listeners, Barney is nodding knowingly at that.
And then I got to say, because it's back to the Brits, cultural studies was huge. By the time I met Eric Weisbard, who became my husband, still my husband, and he had actually designed his own sort of course at Princeton, where he went to undergrad and studied Stuart Hall and Simon Frith and Angela McRobbie and Dick Hebditch, all those guys, Paul Willis. And so when I met him, he introduced me to that stuff, and that became the basis of the way I was thinking about things. I think I might have already known about Dick Hebditch, that little yellow edition of Subculture with the mod on the cover. I think I had that. But yeah, I was particularly in love with the book Learning to Labor by Paul Willis. I don't know why, but but yeah, great stuff.
Well, that's really interesting. It doesn't surprise me to hear that all that kind of cultural theorizing was somewhere in the mix. What prompted you to move to New York? And was that anything to do with Eric? I mean, you moved there in the early 90s, I think?
It was actually the opposite. It was in a long-winded way. It did have to do with Eric. So when I met Eric, he was about to start grad school at Berkeley, or he was waiting to see if he would get in, and he did get in. And he started writing for the newspaper I wrote for, which at the time was the SF Weekly. I was an editor there. Alternative weeklies are my lifeblood for sure. Yeah. And then I ended up going to grad school and getting my master's, and I was about to go on to into a PhD program at Berkeley when I received a call from the Times. Through Eric, I had discovered the Paz and Jop poll from the Village Voice. So I didn't really know about that. I was really involved in alternative weekly journalism on the West Coast. I was writing for the LA Weekly, and I'd written for the Rocket, obviously, and I was an editor at the SF Weekly, but I just wasn't very aware of East Coast journalism. And he's like, you could write for the Voice, you just have to submit to the Paz and Jop poll, because at the time, that poll, the annual music critics poll, Robert Christgau ran it, and his rule was anyone who published could submit anything. If you published your own zine and 8 people read it, you could submit to the poll, and you could write comments that then might be published in the newspaper or in the poll. So I did that one year, and Bob liked what I wrote, and he ended up publishing it as a little essay. And then I started writing for them. And through that, John Perellis noticed my writing. And someone was leaving the Times actually to move to the West Coast. And he called me up, as John. Hi, I'm John, whatever. I can't do a John imitation, but he called me up and he said, I have this position. It's a stringer position, but I can guarantee you work. And I very politely said, no, thank you. I'm studying Beowulf. I'm busy, whatever. I'm like doing this PhD. And we were living in Oakland at the time, and we had a little 2-room apartment, and Eric was in the back room, and he literally yelled. He was like, "What did you just do? What did you do?" And he's like, "Call him back." So I did. And, I didn't want to leave the Bay Area. I didn't want to leave Eric, but he convinced me to give it a go. And he stayed in Berkeley and was still in school for a little while, but I moved out to New York to work for the Times. And then only a few months later, I did the unthinkable, which was I left the Times for the Voice, because all of my friends were at the Voice. My world was so much about alternative journalism. And I love the people at the Times, and of course, who doesn't love that audience? But working at the Voice, that was Mecca to me. So I went back and worked for the Voice for a few years. Then subsequently, I would return to the Times. So
you also sent us a great piece from the Voice from May 1992 about Tori Amos and Sarah McLachlan, and a little bit on Tanita Tikaram. It's called "Ride the Unicorn." It's sort of what I would think of as just sort of classic sort of voice music journalism, like hyper highbrow and intellectual. I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs from that. And this is like, so before you get to Tori Amos in this piece, you talk about Kate Bush.
Yeah, my idol, my God.
Yeah. So this is what you're saying about Bush. While her mentors, Peter Gabriel and Pink Floyd, played musical Dungeons and Dragons, Bush expressed womanhood in sticky, mystical terms, quoting Tennyson and Gurdjieff and donning the costumes of bat, ghost, and gypsy. She's the first woman I ever heard singing about the world beyond romantic love. She even occasionally took on a man's voice. Overly theatrical artists, male or female, tend to give rockers headaches anyway. It's a nervous response meant to protect rock's masculine core. Anyway, it was a delight to read that piece. I don't think I'd read it before, and we're featuring that on the homepage.
That was my first piece I ever wrote for The Voice.
Oh, was it? Wow. Well, even better. Better.
That was I was living, I think that was before I moved to New York. That was when I was living in that little 2-room. I can remember, I don't know if y'all have this, but as I get older, I have these visual memories. I can suddenly be back in a place. And that, when you're reading that, I'm back in that little apartment. That's where I wrote that piece.
Well, how wonderful. I mean, you're not entirely complimentary about Tori Amos in the book, but you later collaborated with her on the 2005 book Piece by Piece. And for that reason, we decided to make part of Steven Daly's 1998 Rolling Stone interview with Tori the week's new audio. And Mark is going to tell us a bit about this.
Yeah, well, first of all, she's
just basically moved to England. She's got married to an English record producer or engineer. This is 1998, March 1998. She talks about what she likes about England and about living well. And then she starts talking about believing in herself from a young age. Let's listen to the first clip. It's about the piano as parent.
I went back to wanting to be a dancer so bad, but I can't dance. I'm, pathetic. But I put all my dancing into my piano. I put everything into the piano. I think that's the double-edged sword. The piano parented me in many ways. The piano was the woman I wished I could be. The piano was the passion and could get away with it. They may burn the witches, but they're not going to burn the piano.
That's so Tori. That's the Tori right there.
It is the Tori.
She talks about religion and mythology, about not censoring her songs, about her need for privacy, her curiosity about ideas, and finding tools to do her inner work, and I quote directly there. The things she looks for and puts in her songs, having a relationship with the dead and fairies. Her marriage ceremony, she talks about her marriage, which actually sounds like a bog-standard Church of England wedding, but we'll move on. She talks about her first album, Little Earthquakes, the difficulties of doing that and her relationship with Atlantic. And lastly, she talks about not being part of the whole Lilith Fair scene. Let's listen to the next clip.
Do you ever want to be a member of that girls' club?
No.
Tell me about the girls' club, because there is a girls' club.
I don't even know it. I don't even know where they meet.
Well, Lilith.
Yeah, but I adore Sarah. I'd have a good bottle of wine with Sarah any night of the week. But it's...
Because I'm sure they'd have you in a second if you said I wanted to go on this year and headline or whatever.
It's not about that. But it's not...
What's your relationship to all that?
My shows are theater. Theater. I've worked a long time to be able to create a show. I work with, every crew member is picked based on we all have the same vision. Mm-hmm. This isn't just to do some shows and people can eat chicken and, hear some of their favorite female artists. I think that's completely valid that's out there. You come to my show, you walk into a world. I can't impose that on Lilith. That's not fair. And they can't constrain me either.
Never was a cornflake girl.
So yeah, that's pretty much the audience. Very lot of noise in the background. I'm afraid it's they were eating seafood in a smart London French restaurant.
I gotta say that what she's saying about the tour. When I did the book, I went on tour with her for a little while, and there's no lie in there. She's not making an excuse. I mean, that woman, every night she would determine her set list from, elements of the place where she was, whatever. I don't know if she did astrology actually, but the weather was this, or she was in this town and this historical thing happened. She's in Dallas. She has to do Jackie's Strength. It's humid. That leads her to do this cutoff under the volcano. This fan is in the audience and she knows, like she knew, these special fans, this is their favorite. She is so particular, some might say controlling, that that is a true, she's not just, shining him on as far as that. That's a genuine reason for her not doing Lilith.
How was the experience of collaborating with her on the book piece by piece? I mean, just tell us briefly how it was structured and the essence of what it was.
I mean, it was ideal. I don't think I could match it, honestly, for several different reasons. One, if it's great that you read a little bit about Ride the Unicorn piece and then into that clip, because you can see how her sensibility and my sensibility just completely matched. We're close in age. Gina Arnold was like, well, rock stars just choose people who have similar hair to them to do. I do have curly red hair, but it's less red than it was then. No, but we had similar interests and beliefs as far as like connecting to mythology and fairy tales and stuff like that. And I think we had a similar level of pretentiousness, probably. so, and then it was an intense time in my life because we were in the process of adopting our daughter, who we adopted through open adoption. And initially, when I was supposed to start the project was right when our birth mother, my daughter's birth mother, chose us, which is how it works in open adoption. And so Tori and her people were very generous. John Witherspoon, shout out John Witherspoon, great manager, very generous in pushing things back so I could go through that process. But, I had this baby when I was writing the book, and her daughter's a couple years older than mine. So I think we also met on that level as young mothers, or she was already a mother and I was becoming a mother. So I don't know, it was just the perfect meeting of minds. And then as far as how we wrote the book, if you look at the book, it's very much it's framed through the lens of mythology. And that was something I came up with, but then she loved it. So then we would trade pages back and forth. And I've collaborated with other artists at times, but never was it this intense where she would really take my pages and completely rewrite them. And then I would do another round, and then she would take it and redo it, and I would do it. And yeah, it was the most collaborative experience, one of the most collaborative I've ever had in my life.
Wow. I just think it's interesting the way that can, you sort of framed it earlier when you said some might say controlling. And I think you can hear in that clip that we just heard the way that she sort of reconsiders halfway through what she's saying about not wanting to play her music while people are eating chicken. She sort of suddenly realizes that might come off a certain way and goes, I think it's a perfectly valid thing to do or something like that.
Yeah.
But, it's kind of interesting the way that seems also to be mirrored in that working relationship that you have.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, controlling has a certain sense of judgment about it, but meticulous, maybe that's a word that has a different cast. And she is truly meticulous. And, she's gone on to publish a book, Resistance, that she wrote herself. And I know she wrote it herself, like no help. That's an interesting subject perhaps for another time. I feel that a lot of musicians now are not employing ghostwriters or partners or whatever, and just writing their own books. And more power to them for doing it. Less work for us, I guess. But but Tori's definitely somebody who has the skills and vision to do that.
Sometimes I said, sometimes I hear my voice, and it's been silent all these years.
I wanted just to go back to that decade, the 90s. So obviously the decade before the book was done, but when the audio interview was done, and when you co-edited Rock She Wrote, which is a really, now just a sort of, incredibly important collection of music writings by women. And it was a decade in which women like Tori Amos, PJ Harvey and others really sort of, came into their own, came to the kind of forefront of rock music, right? And I just wonder how you look back on that now relative to the era when, do you think of it, do you remember it as an important decade in music as a woman?
Yeah, I haven't theorized what happened in the 90s that so many scenes, kind of came to fruition at that very moment. But I know others have written about this and are writing about this. A lot of books about the 90s being published now. But it's remarkable to me that, and I guess my pocket theory would be coming out of both indie rock and hip hop, the kind of grassroots movements of both of those in the 80s, they were building and building and building and then exploded, broke, and then the women singer-songwriter thing, it was a little different because it didn't have as much of that indie thing as far as that surfaced. It seemed like it surfaced a little more suddenly. But I don't know if that's really true exactly. I think a lot of these women, like Tori, for example, she was in bands. She was in the notorious band Why Tori Can't Read. KNT Reed before. So they were, these women were cutting their teeth. Or Polly, she had her Automatic Remedy band early on, inspired by indie music. So I think the grassroots indie movement in both rock and hip hop in the 80s set the scene for this breakthrough moment. And then the industry, at least in the US, you all can tell me how it was in the UK, the industry was primed for something new. Like the blockbuster era of the 80s was fading. And those established stars who had been the juggernaut of that era, Michael Jackson, Madonna, Springsteen, Prince, they were still around, but they were, maybe they peaked as far as sales went. So there was a hunger for something new in the mainstream as well. And also the regional awareness that came from indie music, all these young A&R people at labels, they were trying to find the, new scenes. And we always say the next Seattle, but really it was before Seattle broke. It was really the next Athens or the next Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Because there were, those bands that got signed before the grunge moment, right? So, and didn't do that well on major labels like the Replacements and Husker Du. They kind of set the stage for then, let's keep trying. And then eventually comes Nirvana and all the rest of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You mentioned Prince, and I just wanted to allude to the other piece that we're going to feature on the homepage, which is this wonderful account of your hanging out with Prince and him playing you music on New Year's Eve in 2008. New Year's Eve 2008, you get summoned to Beverly Park in LA, and it's a
wonderful.
It's a lovely piece for the LA. And you're living in LA by this time. You are the LA Times pop critic. Anyway, you get a call. Come around. I'm going to play some music. So just briefly tell us. I want to tie this in a little bit with your book, Good Booty, which
thank you.
I confess I've not read, but Mark has read and loved.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate it. You got to get on that shit, Barney. Come on.
I will get on that. I mean, look, I'm assuming just the title "Good Booty" kind of suggests that Prince is probably somewhere in those pages.
Yes, he is. Prince is definitely in the top, 3 or something in my pantheon for sure. Kate and Prince and Bowie maybe are the three. And I will confess, I was and am a lifelong U2 fan. So, we can talk about that maybe in the bonus episode. But
the footnotes.
I just, I got into Prince when I was in high school, I guess, and early college. I always loved him. So I knew, when I was living in LA, he was out there. Basically, he had severed ties with his major record label after many years of various forms of struggle with major labels. And at the time, he was trying to figure out how to self-release music. And he was releasing these 3 records in conjunction with Target, the American retail chain. And so he was out there, honestly, learning the ropes as best he could, like learning the music industry, and also like constantly playing parties and small shows and theater shows. It was an amazing time for a Prince fan to be in LA because there were a lot of opportunities to see him. And the way you tell it is true. One morning, very early, and I can't believe I was even awake, but lucky I was. I got this phone call from an assistant of his, and she says, "Well, we want to play some music for some journalists. Can you come over tonight?" And as far as I can tell, this seems just unbelievable. I was the only person who responded. I don't know if it's because the other journalists felt it was a scam or something. I don't know, I mean, Prince was certainly known for having employees who were not necessarily seasoned music industry vets. He just liked to hire who he'd like to hire. So, but I believed it, and I drove off that night in my, crappy little Mazda and drove up the hills up Mulholland Drive and into this incredible planned community where I later found out like Magic Johnson lived there, and, just all these executives lived there, higher up, film producers, people like that. Beautiful at the top of Mulholland Drive. Drive up to the house, and, I'm parking next to, I guess, like a Rolls or, whatever, in my truly dirty, disgusting car. And I get out and I go knock on the front door, and I'm let in and walk into this side room where these two young guys who came from Central Casting for like computer geeks are in there fiddling around with something in the web, on the web. And it was just like mid 2000s, right? So it's not exactly early days for the web, but not like now, And Prince walks in, and the first words out of his mouth, because I then had more blonde hair, he looks at me and he goes, "You used to be a redhead." And through my, you can imagine I had been like in love with Prince in my mind since I was 19, right? And I'm like, Prince knows my hair color. That's insane. How can this be? But the man did his research. He truly did his research. And then he just orchestrated this amazing evening that, truly had thought out every single element to the point where, so it was a 3-record set. Every album he played for me in a different setting. So the first one, which was kind of like a funk record, he's like, "We got to go to my car. Let's go out and sit in my car. It has the best stereo system." And we sit in the car, and he's like, "Well, Miles, I bought this car from Miles Davis." I'm just like, this is insane. It was like a Maserati or something. I don't know cars. But then the next one, which was actually featured his then protege / companion, whose name was Bria Valenti. So it was like a kind of Vanity 6 project. Mm-hmm. That one he's playing for me in his bedroom as he like dances around, and I'm sitting stiff as a board, next to a window on a bench being like, I'm in the bedroom of Prince. What the hell is going on? And then the third one, we pile in a limo. Bria Valenti emerges like down this spiral staircase, a gorgeous woman. And we all go into this limo, and we're going off to some club in Hollywood. And, I have to say, still to this day, I have no idea where we went. Afterwards, I tried to recreate the route. I could not find this club. I believe he conjured this club purely for this experience. We walk in, it was full of people, and we're drinking champagne. And he's like, "I don't drink, but I'm going to have champagne tonight." And this was in his Jehovah's Witness phase, right? So,
sure.
And he's like drinking champagne, and then there's a band playing. He jumps on stage and he's playing with it. I'm just like, this is crazy. But I truly believe it was like Brigadoon or something, where that club only rises out of the mists for that one occasion. So, anyway, when I wrote the piece, I was like, how in God's name am I going to write this piece? And I finally decided, I'm just going to write what happened, and I'm going to say, I can't believe this happened. And the piece was very successful, I think, because I just let people in on the craziness of this experience.
Fantastic.
That's absolutely wonderful. Of course, Prince was a massive Joni Mitchell fan. So yes. We can go straight into, he did an incredible version of, it was A Case of You on that Joni tribute album, which is like everything Prince did and every cover he ever did is extraordinary.
Yes.
And he used to play, there was a period, wasn't it, when the gig music, when you're sitting there waiting for him to come on, was the hissing of summer lawns. He would just play that every night.
Yes, hissing was his favorite.
Yeah. So on to Joni and your book, Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell. Let's start with the obvious point. It's not a conventional rock biography.
Right.
How would you describe it, Anne?
Oh, I've tried to apply different terms to it. Experimental biography or literary biography it's a hybrid. I think it's a hybrid combining memoir, criticism, historical contextualization and biography. Originally, in the first furtive drafts, it was more thematically oriented and it could have just ended up like essays about Joni Mitchell, but I was encouraged by my agent and my editor to be more linear. So that's why it has the biographical chronological thread that runs through it. And that's why it's structured that way. And I'm very grateful that I was pushed in that direction, because I think it makes it a much more compelling read to have that narrative, pull. But really, I was confronted with this problem, which is, how do you write about an artist, a human being who is also a legend, an icon that, has sort of more than one existence in our world. She has her human existence, her creative existence, and then her legend existence, the aura she casts on the world. And I wanted to find a way that I could touch on each of those Jonis and sort of end up with multiple Jonis by the end of it, which is what I think I did.
But there are multiple Jonis, aren't there? I mean, that's just what makes her so compelling is that she's such a complex person and such a complex artist. And I think there's so much insight in your book about the numerous sort of threads that kind of make up this thing called Joni Mitchell. And I really appreciated the depth of the thought you'd put into this. And as you said, the contextualization, and it's a model for a new kind of biographical writing, I think.
Well, thank
and
you.
It's as much, it's, and you're in there. And I think I like that because it's as much an account of your own relationship with her music and her life. I don't think in the end one can separate the two things. She is extraordinary. The music is so extraordinary. One of the things I really wanted to kind of focus on, just because it's, 2024 and it's 50 years since Court and Spark, which I just have to say still it's the Joni album I go back to more than any other, with hissing. I think it might be good just to, because I was fortunate enough to interview her 20, 30 years. 1994, I interviewed her.
Yeah, it's a good interview, Barney. I read it numerous times.
Well, we just pick out a little clip that's just sort of kind of relevant to this, sort of how she gets from kind of both sides now to, Free Man in Paris. So, Jasper, if you just play this short clip, and we can then maybe sort of talk about, the fusioneer Joni.
The way I see it, he said you just can't win it. Everybody's in it for their own gain. You can't please them all. There's always somebody calling you down. I do my best and I do.
Once I crossed the border, I began to write. I didn't write. I was really a folk singer up till 1965. My repertoire was folk songs. Right. Once I crossed the border, I began to write, and my voice even changed. I no longer was imitative of the folk style, really. My voice was then my real voice, and with a slight folk influence. But from the first album, that was no longer folk music. No. It was just a girl with a guitar that made it look that way. Right. And no section could play it. It was too intricate harmonically and rhythmically. When you put the groups that James Taylor, for instance, who has a bigger pop base than I did at that time, and Carole King, who had they both had more timpanally. I had more classicism. So I tried for 4 projects to find a band, and I tried things with players, but it always squashed it. Yes. Finally, it was recommended to me by the players that I was trying to work with that I'd look for jazz musicians. Yes. And I found the LA Express, and that worked well on Court and Spark. Absolutely.
I was a free man in Paris. I felt unfettered and alive. There was nobody calling me up for favors, and no one's future to decide.
I wanted to talk a bit about Court and Spark. In a sense, just sidestep Blue, really. The world's talked enough about Blue, and we all love Blue, and that's the Lady of the Canyon. And this is Joni sort of moving to sort of David Geffen's home in Bel Air, isn't it?
Yeah, she's living in Bel Air when she makes this record, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I love the chapter you write about the word, freedom and fusion.
Thank you.
The different players, and then once we get to Jaco Pastorius. Is that some of your favorite Joni music, and how do you contextualize it in terms of the evolution of her career and her talent?
Oh, absolutely. And it was a gift to be able to write about this period in Joni's life, because it also led me to really fall deeply into the rabbit hole of fusion in general. And I have decided I'm going to say this in every interview I do. I want to do a jazz fusion podcast because I feel like the world needs it. I feel like these players need to be redeemed. Fusion is totally back. Y'all have, amazing jazz scene going on in London right now. And so many of those players are taking from that era. Maybe it's under other names like spiritual jazz or whatever, which is its own path, by the way. I don't mean to combine them. But I just became fascinated, obsessed with all these different players, and especially about how non-jazz, I was going to say pop, but people always think pop means Sabrina Carpenter. No shade on Sabrina Carpenter, but the point is all these non-jazz players are making records with jazz players, and fascinating time, And there's that famous question all of us get asked, if you could go back to any moment in music history, where would you go? Would you go to the Sun Sessions in Memphis? Would you go to Cafe Society and see Billie Holiday? And I would have said those things, but now I feel like I would want to go back to the studios, to A&M studios in like 1974 to 1977 to be in those rooms where Joni's leading this band, and Court and Spark is basically the LA Express, but later she would work with so many different incredible musicians, and Airto Moreira and Alex Acuna, and obviously Herbie Hancock, and we've got Wayne Shorter in the mix, and as you mentioned, Jaco. So, and rising to the occasion every time and figuring out how her very much self-designed systems of composition could be translated and related to these players so that they could create something that truly was, to quote a great book, Birds of Fire by Kevin Fellez, about jazz fusion, this broken middle, this area between genres that I think she really occupied and honestly, in different ways, continued to occupy for the rest of her career.
Jasper, as a musician yourself and someone who is very immersed in the London jazz moment, when you listen to those kind of mid-70s Joni records, what do they mean to you? How do they sound to you?
I mean, it's my favorite Joni, certainly, is that sort of period of fusion. And I think what's interesting is that it is a true fusion. It's not that Joni is sort of trying to play jazz or trying to kind of learn about scales and 2-5-1 progressions and whatever else. It's not a kind of technical kind of venture into jazz playing. It's really that she's working with, as we've said, jazz players. And I think that gives it something interesting. So it's not necessarily jazz, and it's not what she's been doing before. And so that's what's good for me about it. And I think you write about that really well in the book, and about her own kind of questions of, not feeling like she belongs in what she perceives as a sort of technical jazz world, which is a sort of preconception that people have about jazz, which I think you kind of rightly call out as not necessarily accurate anyway. But that's all very, very interesting to me, that period where she's exploring those avenues.
Well, if you stick with Court and Spark, you can see how she's using sort of similar song structures that she'd always been using. Because, you mentioned like modal compositions or like playing in between the notes, and on a song like Just Like This Train, that's one of my favorites on the record. And the way that the guitar it has that, it's jumping up the scale in this modal way, right? And it gets that feeling of a train moving. You know how when a train is pulling out of station but not quite pulling out of the station, captures it so well. But that's something you can definitely imagine her playing on her guitar, on an earlier record. So they just figured out how to electrify that and take it into a different place, And I also think what you're talking about, that feeling of dislocation, do I belong here? Those kinds of questions. She also embeds that so interestingly in the songs, in their lyrics. So on this record alone, you have People's Parties, for example, where that is so, like, I think about Eve Babbitt, I think about obviously Joan Didion, the writers of the time, capturing that scene. And I love this image of Joni standing at this party, I mean, being gorgeous, and I'm sure not really being treated as an outsider at all, but feeling like an outsider. And observing and this music, which is sort of really beautiful and smooth, but also like slightly unsettled.
Yes. Yes, it's that combination, isn't it? That combination of unease and extraordinary kind of elegance in the arrangement.
I think her guitar chords are, in a sense, the sort of basis of this, because she always came up with weird guitar chords.
Totally.
You know, there's not standard stuff that other singer-songwriters are doing. And the other thing is that when she uses these great fusion musicians, Jacko and so on and so forth, you know, it's not about soloing, but you hear their voices. Their voices are absolutely there in the tracks. Neither overwhelming nor, you know, or being subservient.
I think she makes room for them. Absolutely.
And she, you know, Tom Scott may be the first that she did that with his saxophone and with, you know, and her vibe with the whole LA Express was so intuitive. And obviously this is where it's appropriate to say during this time she was living with John Guerin, who's the drummer for the band, right? And it's interesting to me that after she leaves behind the Laurel Canyon cohort, every man who is her life companion is a bass player or a drummer after that. It's true. I mean, it culminates in her long marriage to Larry Klein, right? But she is trying to learn about rhythm, and she's trying to learn about the bottom in the mix. And I think I'm not saying she was picking these guys simply because of their instruments, but I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, you know?
I just have to throw in, you've reminded me, because you mentioned Larry Klein. When I interviewed her, Turbulent Indigo was just about to come out, so we were mainly talking about that. And she says the first thing she said, I asked about her Larry Klein. She said, "Do you know we broke up the day before we started the sessions?"
Isn't that crazy? I mean, and
just classic,
amazing.
Joni.
And you know, she and Larry, I definitely romanticize their relationship and their creative collaboration in the book, but also the fact they continue to work together. And really, you know, I don't, as far as I can tell, Larry doesn't seem to be part of the Joni Jam era so much, but up until that era, he was always in the mix, you know, and they made some pretty amazing records long after they were no longer a couple, especially the orchestral records, you know, Both Sides Now. And I love Chalk Mark. That one, of course, they were in England. They made that in England. And when they were all hanging out with Peter Gabriel, and there's that insane video where Peter Gabriel and her are like in the blankets coming out of the teepee. One of my favorite videos of all time.
Yeah, and their voices sound so, I mean, in terms of the timbre on My Secret Place.
Perfect.
They're so close.
Yeah.
They're almost, at moments you're not sure whether it's, because Joni's voice has gone down a register, and he can sing quite high. So I love that it's not. And then there's Billy Idol, of course, on Dancing Clown. That's a hysterical cameo.
Insane. Well, I think trying to reclaim Dancing Clown was a bit beyond me. I couldn't quite go that deep, but I do love those records. But back to to Court and Spark. Another thing that I think is cool about this record is that she openly claims jazz with Raised on Robbery, which is basically kind of an Andrews Sisters, Pointer Sisters, you know, vocal jazz workout, where she's also owes a debt to Bette Midler, I think, who is a peer of hers, who they're kind of chasing each other during this time in some ways. And that leads right into Trouble Child, which is this incredible, very Miles Davis influenced modal song. And then that goes to Twisted, where it's the Annie Ross song, right?
That's right. Yeah, Lambert.
And she loves, I mean, Joni has said, Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross were my Beatles. You know, she loved them. And she there's somewhere floating out there on YouTube, there's a clip of her with Annie Ross, and you could tell her adulation for Annie. And I tried to interview Annie for this book, and I had one phone call with her, but she was older, and she passed away shortly after I tried to talk to her. She just wasn't up for it. But I think the influence of vocal jazz on Joni is a lifelong influence, not just this period.
My analyst told me that I was right out of my head, the way he described it. He said I'd be better dead than live. I didn't listen to his jive. I knew all along that he was all wrong, and I knew that he thought I was crazy, but I'm not, don't know.
I wanted to just briefly talk about how, we get from Court and Spark to Mingus, right?
Mm-hmm,
sort of via Hajira and Don Juan. And sort of just how well you think that music works. I mean, it's so different, isn't it? There's something so, as I said, so elegant and classy and sophisticated and kind of almost Joan Didion-esque about Court and Spark. And then there's the whole sort of hissing of summer lawns, the suburban kind of chic thing going on in hissing. And then Hajira is just such a sort of radical. I mean, you'll have seen her singing like Coyote in the Rolling Thunder film, and so she's kind of walking away from this kind of David Geffen LA, isn't she? She hits the road, and this extraordinary bass player Jacko, becomes such an important part of, and it's almost like it's just a different Joni, and then by the time you get to Mingus, it's like it's really out there, isn't it? I mean, we were talking a little bit before you joined the Zoom session about Mingus and how well it works. I mean, I can't quite get there, but then I'm a simpleton, and I like it. And I just, I mean, obviously it was a big moment, and Warner's really had to kind of like, all right, Joni, if you want to do this, but then it was like, you're never going to do that again. I mean, you can't allow you to do that again. I mean, how well do you think something like Mingus works?
I came around to it, I have to say. I mean, I think sort of really immersing in the story of how it came to be, and how she was summoned to do this project that was meant, I think, for everyone involved to kind of elevate their profile, right? So Mingus is very ill, dying of ALS, and Joni is at a point in her career where she'd seen her record sales kind of go down, even though in retrospect now I think Don Juan and Hajira have come back up in her canon.
Sure.
But
definitely Hajira. Definitely
Hajira. Definitely Hajira. But
Don Juan not helped by the cover, I would say
now.
I mean,
we can talk about that.
We can talk about that.
But so she's brought into basically, write lyrics for some Mingus tunes, or actually I think initially it was supposed to be, sorry, I don't have my notes in front of me, almost like a covers record. And she initially rejects the first approach that they were suggesting. But then she takes some of Mingus's tunes and, the beautiful audacity in which she's like, I can write these stories, which is not unconnected, Jasper, to the audacity that causes her to create the character of Art Nouveau, that she feels she can channel and connect with the soul of Charles Mingus, but she does it beautifully, I think. And while it is a more diffuse album, and maybe your tolerance for it has to match your tolerance for ambient music or, the more truly out there aspects of fusion, because it's not a song oriented record exactly, it's a mood, it's a vibe, guys.
It's a vibe. I mean, I love just to be straight, I'm really a jazz ignoramus, but I do love Mingus, and yet I find the Mingus album by Joni a bit forced as an exercise. That's the truth.
I get that, but I still think there are some amazing songs on here, and I think for me the apotheosis is that song "Chair in the Sky," where it almost does enter into like new age ambient spiritual jazz territory, which isn't where Mingus lives, but it's got that very diffuse quality. And I just feel like it's sort of like a tiny Paprika Plains or something, where she's creating a fantasy realm where Mingus can still stay with us, and be alive. But aside from that, there are some amazing just Joni portrait kind of observational songs, The Dry Cleaner from Des Moines, for example, some of her social commentary on Sweet Sucker Dance. And then you have The Wolf That Lives in Lindsay, which is an insane song that doesn't actually have anything to do with Mingus that I don't know why it's on this record, but it's one of my favorites, and it is a song that incorporates like these tape loops of wolves howling. That there's an amazing story where she was just like in some hotel, I don't know, after a show. I think it was with Tim Hardin, maybe. I can't remember who, but anyway, this guy in the bar is just like, I have these boxes of tapes of wolves howling, and she's like, oh wow, great, let's go to your room. It was the 70s, and finds these tapes and then incorporates them later into this song. So I also love any moment when Joni's doing something that's so innovative technically. So I think she's got that going on here too.
Am I right in saying that The Wolf That Lives in Lindsay was the only track from Mingus that was on that Misses, the hits and misses compilation?
I think so. And it was not really part of it was really separate from the rest of the Mingus project also. I did not discover, and now you're making me want to go out and do more research, like why that song ended up on that album. Exactly, because it doesn't quite fit,
No,
it's its own thing.
No, it is berserk, isn't it?
It is.
Something that I really like about the way that you write the book and the way that you're talking now about Joni is that you're very much making clear what an innovator she was in a technical perspective,
yes.
which very much ties into, we're featuring this other piece of yours, a new canon that when you helped put together that, 150 greatest albums made by women as a sort of list of a new kind of best albums ever list. And in the article that you wrote to accompany that, you really go into why it's important to talk about women as technically engaged people and not just as sort of forces of nature.
Yeah,
the idea that women do as well as traditional the women be thing. I love the way you tease that out in that article.
Thank you.
I think that the way that you approach it in the book, that comes through very strongly to me.
Yeah, thank you so much, because really, there's been great writing on Joni as a musician. Lloyd Whitesell's book is really fantastic if you want a musicological approach. I also think that's the best thing about David Yaffe's biography, Reckless Daughter, is that he, as a jazz critic, as someone who studied jazz, really can get into her jazz side, and he does it well. But even so, and I'm probably guilty of this too, and even it's funny because and the Turning the Tables list, Blue is number one, which I personally, I don't know. Blue is like one of the books of the Bible or something. It's like you can't take it out, you can't remove it from the canon. And it is also musically innovative. And when I try to write about it and talk about it in relation to Miles Davis and Bill Evans and the way she uses space and modes on that record, but I think, Jasper, that's why I stick strongly with Joni's work after the mid-70s or starting in the mid-70s. And because I'm just more interested at this point in the kinds of innovations she hits on working with other musicians, not just on her own or in these small groups. She had done as much as she could do. You're totally right, Mark. As a guitar player, she was so influential, and those innovations started because of her weak hand that she had because she had suffered polio as a kid, and that's why she had to redesign her tunings, and the open tunings were there for her to explore because she was watching Richie Havens and other blues players use these open tunings, but she took it so much farther. She went, but once she starts meeting people like Jaco Pastorius, Wayne is so important, Wayne Shorter, all of these, Don Elias, and then onward to the stuff she did with Larry. Larry opens her up to a whole new world. They're listening to Tears for Fears. They're listening to, truly, they love, and and actually I had one exchange with him, an email exchange where I said, so I think it was about Night Ride Home, because I love that record, and I feel like it's got this, again, a great vibe record, and it's got almost like an ambient quality to the way the songs are constructed. And I said, would you ever use the word new age? And I could feel him bristling through the email, and he's like, I would never call what we did New Age. But Joan and I are big fans of Brian Eno. And I thought that was so interesting that, they were listening to Eno. So, as you all know this so well, musicians will jump any gate you put in front of them. They're always doing something you don't think they're doing, They're always like influenced by something you don't expect, and at least the best ones. And that is something that I came to value so much in Joni, and really wanted, to me, that's the most exciting romantic aspect of her. I don't really care who she had in her bed, whatever, only to the extent is that if they got up the next morning and went into the studio, then I care, because I want to know what happened in the studio.
Yeah. The last thing I just wanted to say about your book and Joni is I really like the fact that you don't altogether approve of all the sort of recent sort of worship and fawning around the sort of Joni Jams, because I felt like I couldn't really say that, but it's what I felt. It's like it's a little bit nauseating. I'm sorry. Because it's just Joni kind of basking with this big smile on her face, and it's like, that's not who you really are, Joni. And so I applaud you because you're being a bit of a party pooper there, aren't you?
Well, I have to thank Michelle Mercer for writing that Substack in which she honestly, shared her feelings. And that was a risk. I adore Brandi Carlile. She's I think such a force for good, and has lifted up so many people, and, someone who gave back the minute she got enough fame to do so. And not only Joni, but Tanya Tucker and Wynonna, and then all the younger artists she's mentored. And so this is not a criticism in any way of Brandi or of the Bramley, her family around her. But, we all have our Jonis who live on in our minds, and we all have, at least I have, and it seems like you have, Barney, some fond memories of the pricklier Joni, the one who was
paradoxically, who
was a troubled child, and who actually also made a lifelong critique of that kind of fame and that kind of holding people up, in her songs as well. But what's interesting is, I think, subsequent to my finishing the book, she did the Grammy performance, and you could see it sneaking through, I think, in the glimmer in her eye, in the way someone pointed out to me when she sang the phrase, they say I've changed in Both Sides Now. And she said something like, they say, Joni, I've changed, and that I was talking with my friend Jody Rosen, and we're like, that's like late Sinatra, that's like late Frank Sinatra, where he is aware of his persona and he's poking just the tiniest bit of fun at himself. And I think as she gains more command and gets better and better in her health, we're seeing her kind of gently poke a needle into the side of the balloon. So we'll see what happens. Yeah,
and certainly one doesn't want to begrudge the love that she's getting now, and it seems to make her happy. And I think so one can only be glad of that she feels she's getting maybe there's some of the recognition that she feels she didn't get. Well, I mean, even though we feel we've given her.
I mean, that side of it is puzzling, right? And that was one of the things that made me kind of resist this project, even as I took it on. It's like, people act like she hasn't been acknowledged. There's no woman anyway who is as acknowledged. But again, it's the fact that she was still put into that gendered category. And I'm happy to be that my book is on a shelf full of other Joni books, but it's nothing like the massive library of Dylan books, for example, or Beatles books, or even Stones books or Hendrix books. So let's keep adding to that library, and let's see some more women get shelves of their own.
But now, old friends are acting strange. They shake their heads and say, Joni, you've changed. Well, something's lost
Well, is it just fantastic to talk to you about travelling on the path of Joni Mitchell? And before we go, Mark is going to just tell us about some pieces that he's added. And if you have anything to say about those, please jump in. But Mark, over to you.
Yeah, well, particularly being in the same virtual room as the author of Good Booty, I thought this is quite appropriate. This is Caitlin Moran in The Times, writing about Louise, who's one part of Eternal, a girl group who never had a solo career, and why she isn't sexy. Just naked is a state of mind. There are men and women who embody, as Ricky Lake puts it, being all that in a bag of chips, so greatly that they look naked, dressed in a floor-length coat and a crash helmet. Mae West, Ewan McGregor, Tallulah Bankhead, and Jamie Theakston from Live and Kicking all exude essence of filth weasel. It's all in the snake-like glitter of the eye, the splay of the hands, and a way of walking that suggests they have one of those vibrating Ernie from Sesame Street dolls tucked into their pants. The only glitter in Louise's eyes is from nerves. Her hands are clenched and she walks like a 12-year-old in a school crocodile going to a swimming lesson. Her Top of the Pops performances are always mortifying experiences. Styled with all the delicacy of an Ann Summers mannequin, this polite-looking, unassuming girly girl tentatively runs through her dance routines. She touches her body with all the lasciviousness of someone pulling the bobbly bits off her jumper and grinds her hips like one of the mini-pops. One horrible chart show experience had her in chains, with a studded collar around her neck. She looked like an adorable but bewildered collie puppy being sold into slavery. So that's Caitlin's demolition. And this week, Millie Jackson, interviewed by John Abbey of Blues and Soul in 1975, the wonderful Millie Jackson. She says, not that many white folk involve themselves in Millie Jackson music. In fact, they remember me only for My Man, a Sweet Man. And to them, I haven't made a record since. It's that easy. Blacks buy my records, and they are, in general, lower-class blacks. You could call me the poor people's queen, if you like, because my ideas relate to that section of the people. Sure, the upper-class folks are doing it, but no one knows about it. In fact, I'd say there's more hanky-panky business going on in wealthy classes than there is in the street, but it's also discreet. Hey, they can afford to hide it away, right? There was a time when I used to go on stage and start off innocently, singing lovely little ballads. But that isn't what the people want from me. Why? They don't even start smiling until I drop my first shit into the conversation. I mean, that's great. I
wish we could do a whole podcast about Good Booty. I mean, as a topic, it's so interesting.
I'll come back. I'll definitely come back. Absolutely. But, I have two things to say. First, I do really appreciate and enjoy Caitlin Moran's work. I will say that the way she's talking about that artist, and someone I'm not actually that familiar with.
Sure.
It's similar to the way I used to feel about Joni Mitchell. So maybe look a little harder. I'm just saying, look a little harder. Because when I was writing Good Booty, I didn't really include Joni because I didn't think her music was very sexy. And that was just my ignorance, I had not immersed in her music and realized how deeply she goes into the erotic mind of a woman.
Yeah.
I didn't even cite Coyote, which is insane. It has the most dirtiest line in any, mainstream rock.
Yes.
I'll let you all look up.
We won't repeat it.
Yeah, but
on the podcast.
Yeah, and made even more vivid by the fact that that it's Sam Shepard that she's talking about. So that I would just say, whoever Louise is, give her a little time to show us her sexiness. And then Millie Jackson, I'm so glad that you read that because I am such a fan of Millie Jackson. Yeah. She's so underrated, and I think she's underrated because obviously because she is the poor people's queen, and she is a Black American performer who mostly performed for Black audiences, but also because she works blue. She works blue so much, and she is almost like comedy in some ways, but she's not only that. And I think it's so difficult, or historically it's been very difficult for music critics to appreciate artists who work in that mode. We see it again with someone like Swamp Dogg, who's making this fascinating comeback, has a great new record called Blackgrass, but also someone else who's, loves a dirty joke and is hilarious. And for some reason, I don't know, the self-seriousness, how can a tradition that gave us Lester Bangs be self-serious? I don't understand it, but I think there is a tendency towards self-seriousness that makes us not appreciate these comic artists, and I'd put Millie in that category.
Yeah. And also the other first rule of thumb is never sit in the front row to Millie Jackson concert.
Yes, I mean, it's earthy. Let's just say she's an earthy artist. Yeah. But she's still out there, and she has not got her flowers enough, So I hope I hope she does.
Agree. Yeah.
Is she still performing? Because you live in the South, obviously.
Yeah,
now.
no, I
Does she
don't know.
perform?
I was trying to reach into my memory, and as far as I can remember, it hasn't been a few years. I don't know how her health is, but
sure.
But she's right around. I think this year she turns 80. So
wow, right.
But Swamp Dogg is still out there, and
he's still going.
He's still going, and man, it's pretty amazing to see. It really is.
Yeah. Oh, he's one of the greats. Jasper, what have you got for us?
Just a few things to run through quickly. First of which is Florence and the Machine. I've never felt so lonely. Ted Kessler in Q, March 2012. It's actually a much more humorous piece than the sort of headline suggests. Ted follows her around Seattle, interestingly enough, where she's on a day off from her tour. And there's a sort of funny vignette of them going vintage shopping. She's like obsessed with just getting loads and loads of various things, tea trays and dresses and all sorts of stuff. But then there's a more conventional interview which goes into the headline. And it's interesting because she says playing music together is the best job in the world. It really is. And Ted says it's good you say that because otherwise it sounds as if it's almost not worth it. This job is not making me sad. The situation I'm in is making me sad, by which she means like the lonely moments of touring and a big breakup that she's just been through. But the band are all my very good friends, and I think we're playing really well together. It's just that hotel room. The people, the places, the shows, I love all of that. It's just those quiet moments in the hotel room. After all that intensity, to suddenly be alone like that, it's my God, the demons are encroaching. Quickly, must buy some paisley. So it's a fun piece in that vein. One of the recurring themes is how badly she wants to move out of her mum's house. There are some questions from fans at the end of the piece. And what are the 3 things you want to do before you die? She says, 1, move out of my mum's house. If I die and I'm still in my mum's house, I'll be really cross. 2, I'd like to play the Pyramid Stage at Glastonbury Festival. 3, I'd like to go to India. I've never been. Of those 3 things, moving out of my mum's house seems the hardest to me right now.
I think she managed, though. I think she managed.
I think she did.
That thing about the hotel room is so true, isn't it? I mean, I've realized that, not for myself, but I'm just saying, so many musicians I've met like this suffering on the road, which is something we look at feels so romantic, but in fact, it is very lonely existence.
They sort of all blur into one, I think.
Yeah.
Next up, Kate Mossman interviewing Churches in May 2018. And Lauren Maybury, the frontwoman, Kate Mossman writes, she's coming to terms with the fact that if you're famous, you will always be someone's projection. I definitely fall into one of 2 categories, she says brightly, sucking an iced tea. Diminutive wet blanket snowflake or angry feminist bitch, which I think, is her way of capturing exactly the kinds of things that you've written about a lot and that we've talked about a fair bit today.
I'm only interested in angry feminist snowflakes, so there you go.
Yeah. Nice. Maybury, who wrote her master's thesis on images of femininity in women's magazines, has drawn attention to the gendered language that people unthinkingly use to describe female musicians. A female MTV journalist called her a heartbreaker. In 2012, Kate Mossman, thought nothing of calling her formidable, a word often used by men to describe women who scare them a bit. In the intervening years, something has changed. If you write too much about the way a female singer looks now, you look a bit silly. And I think that again, it's just that same thing that you talk about in that piece about 150 great albums. By the way, the top 5 of that, I just wanted to call back to, because the top 5 is absolutely storming. It goes Missy Elliott's Super Duper Fly, Aretha Franklin's I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You, Nina Simone's I Put a Spell on You, Lauryn Hill's Mystic Education of Lauryn Hill, and then Joni's Blue at number 1. But I mean, 2 through 5, what a list as well.
Well, we like to think we started the latest wave of recanonization or adjusting the canons. And now we have like the Apple list, the Pace list, they're constantly coming out. Even just this past few weeks, there's been major adjustments. Rolling Stones adjusted their list. So yeah, and I agree
and
with
Apple
you.
Music did one that put the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill right at
number
the top,
1,
so.
which I think is an interesting thing to discuss and argue about, but maybe not now since we have other things
we're running very short.
You got to get going, haven't you?
Yeah.
I will say it was nice, beautiful to talk to you. And while I had my breakfast of 2 McVitie's biscuits with peanut butter and jelly, so I'm a McVitie's biscuit devotee. So there you go.
Wonderful. Well, to all our listeners, do go out and buy and read the wonderful Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell by our guest Ann Powers. Thank you so much for joining us.
Loose Booty.
Good
booty.
Loose Booty. Yeah,
Good Booty.
That's Mark Priggle's spin on it.
Loose Booty. What song?
Loose Booty.
Whose song was that?
That's another episode. That's definitely
Louis
another
Jackson
episode.
reference there. But
Yeah, I think it is. Or Blowfly. Blowfly, if you remember.
exactly.
But thanks again so much.
This was so fun. I loved it. Let's do it again.
We'll do it again. Have a great day in Nashville, Anne.
Thanks so much.
Thank you again, and goodbye.
Bye.
If loving you is wrong, I don't want to be right. If being right means being without you, I'd rather live alone to a lie.
That concludes episode 178 of the Rock's Backpages podcast. Many thanks to special guest Ann Powers. Travelling on the Path of Joni Mitchell is published by HarperCollins and available now from all good bookshops. Those to Barney Hoskins and Mark Pringle, and it was co-hosted and produced by Jasper Murison Bowie. The Rock's Backpages podcast is part of the Pantheon Podcast Network. You can find thousands of articles, as well as hundreds of full-length audio interviews at rocksbackpages.com.